So I'm going to read from Matthew chapter 21. And these passages over the next few weeks until we get to Easter, I'm just going to, the Lent readings that we're doing, a few of them stick out to me. And so I've just been thinking of it, and I want to grow in my understanding of God, and I think I want to practice Lent in maybe just take it more serious than I have in the past. But I really want to know God, and I want God to teach me and you of how do we live out our faith in the world that God has placed us in now. And one of the things that has struck me that I've bought into, and I think it's a falsehood, it's true but not, that salvation is about being saved so that I get to go to heaven one day when I die. And I'm beginning to see that's not really the full story of salvation and God's call on our lives. And I think we know this, but that's true. But how do I bring that reality into the here and now where God has placed me? How do I live out my faith in the here and now with what God has entrusted me, whatever that may be? And it's different for you than it is for me, because we've been placed in different spots, right? We rub shoulders with different people. And so this passage that we're going to read, starting at Matthew 21, verse 33, it's coming under this notion that the scribes and the Pharisees, Jesus is preaching. So this passage that we're going to read is happening in a church service. Jesus is in the synagogue. He's opened up the scriptures and he's preaching to the people. And the scribes and Pharisees are sitting there and they're listening to him with a critical ear going, and they're trying to tear it apart. Right? And they're questioning his authority. They say this earlier on. It says, and when he entered the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came up to him as he was teaching. So here he's teaching, and you've got these men in these big robes coming up, right? And they're interrupting him. And they say this to him: by what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority? Like that, would that not change the dynamic of what's going on in that church service? Yeah, it'd be quite an awkward moment. And then Jesus begins to tell a couple of parables. And this is where we pick it up. He's trying to tell, remember the question is, does Jesus have authority over all things? What authority do you have, Jesus? Because we have authority over God's people. What right do you have to be teaching and speaking these things? How would I respond to that? Well, I'm not Jesus, first of all. But this is how he responds, and I think it's an amazing parable. He says this: hear another parable. There was a master of a house who planted a vineyard. And he put a fence around it, and he dug a wine press in it, and he built a tower, and he leased it to tenants. And he went into another country. Now, when the season for fruit drew near, that's harvest time. When harvest time came, he sent his servants to the tenants to get his fruit. It was a common practice back then for these wealthy people to take their property, to lease it out, and there would have been an agreement. So let's say Rick's working for me as an owner, and I say, okay, we're going to come up to an agreement. I'll give you 25% if you give me 75%, or whatever the agreement we come on. So these tenants they've agreed to it. Now the landowner, I've sent my servant to Rick and say, give me my cut. Right? That's what's happening. This was happening in the Roman culture at the time as well. So Jesus is taking a real life thing, putting feet on it. But there's more that we're going to see, that the Pharisees are going to start picking up notes that they've heard sung, words that they've heard sung centuries before that have been spoken into their lives, that begin to rattle them down a bit deep in their heart. So when the season of fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the tenants to get his fruit. And the tenants took his servants and beat one, killed another, stoned another. That's 3 that I can count of. Again, he sent other servants, more than the first. So now we're at least up to 7, right? Doing the math. And they did the same thing to them. Finally, he sent his son. So now we're up to at least 8. He sent his son, saying, they will respect my son. But when the tenants saw the son, they said to themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him and have his inheritance. What presumption of how inheritance even work. And they took him and they threw him out of the vineyard and they killed him. When therefore the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants? They said to him, we will put those wretches to a miserable death and let out the vineyard to other tenants who will give them the fruits in their season. And Jesus said to them, have you never read the scriptures? This is what we just sung about. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it's marvelous in our eyes. Therefore, I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people producing its fruits. And the one who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces. When it falls on anyone, it will crush him. Now we're back to Daniel, the prophecy that we read. When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard these parables, they perceived that he was speaking about them. Intelligent folks. And although they were seeking to arrest him, they feared the crowds because they held him to be a prophet. Lent, and this is Jesus moving us towards the cross that is empty, the tomb that is empty, because the son that was killed has risen, right? Tom Wright says Lent is a time for discipline, confession, and honesty. Not because God is mean or fault-finding or finger-pointing, but because he wants you and I to know the joy of being cleaned out, ready for all the good things that he has now in store for us. So I began to think about this parable. Who has authority in my life? Who has the right to speak into my life and demand that me obey? Who has the ultimate authority over your life? And as I was listening to do you know what a deconstructing story is? It's where someone who's grown up in the church and now they're casting away all their faith, they're deconstructing it. It's really just they're putting their faith in something other than Jesus. And they said this, that they now believe that big T truth comes from within oneself. And what I was struck with, it's an authority issue, isn't it? Is I want to be my own authority. I want to be my own boss. That it's kind of a way, it's the adult way of saying no. When my kids were little, that was one of the first words they learned. Right now we as adults just say it in different ways. Oh, I'm busy. Oh, something came up. Right? You know. Or as a dad, I used to use my kids as an excuse of why I couldn't. Oh, my kids need a nap. I'm sorry, I can't. Yeah. So this struggle of authority is not. It's not strange. It's not even that remote from our own lives and hearts, is it? No one likes to be told what to do. No one likes to be challenged, confronted, or questioned. This is what's happening in this parable to the chief priests. Their authority is being questioned. And so here's the scene. They've gathered on the Sabbath. Jesus is preaching. He's rudely interrupted. And instead of getting angry and outraged, he begins to tell some parables. Small story with a big idea. With massive theological implications that are rooted and grounded in who God is. Jesus begins to tell these stories, these small stories with big ideas, and the implications that's connected to those stories. He'll begin to reverse the challenge of why they should actually respect him and abandon their own authority and surrender to him. See, people are being drawn to Jesus, and the rulers of the day are being threatened by it. They don't like it. Their influence is waning, and so they're trying to shame Jesus, to mock Jesus, to make light of his truths that he's speaking. And that's happening in our lives today too. Christians are looked as foolish, narrow-minded, archaic. Come on, we need to be progressive. No, these are ancient truths, unchanging truths that have always been there. But Jesus' method and way is so beautiful. So here's a bit of background. Jesus is using Israel's history and the surrounding culture around to reveal the false assumptions that these Pharisees have in their relationship and God's call on their life. So what would it look like for us to put this story into our own perspective today? And I was trying to think, okay, well, here's a vineyard. I don't really have much vineyard experience. And yet as I watch the news, one of the themes that keeps coming up is we're in a housing crisis. So suppose a very wealthy person, individual, came into our community and he built a 100, room apartment complex. Okay? It has 100 dwellings for families. Then and he spared no expense, by the way. It's a gated community. It's got a massive fence around it. It's got a security system that's second to none. A massive tower. They got security guards watching over it to keep the people safe, to protect the people. We're watching this. We're seeing it being built. The landowner has chosen a team of people. He's put out some tenders, and these people have come, and he's come to an agreement of how they're to care for the place. And he's told them, I will give you need to give me 25%, and I will give you the rest. Now, out of that 75%, you're responsible to look after the place, to care for the place. If there's something that gets broken, you need to fix it, and you can keep the rest of it. This landowner goes away. He's in another country. And he sends an employee. And once a year, he comes to collect his percentage. Let's say you live next to this. And of course, in a smaller community, word gets around pretty quick, doesn't it? Especially today. One little click or something, and I get these little messages of what's happening in our valley. He sends his employee to collect his percentage. Now, in this particular situation, the landowner holds all the power here. If you go back into, and we miss some of this, because in the time that Jesus was telling this parable, the landowners there had absolute power. In fact, many of them had hit squads, goon squads. They were like a mafia, and they could send assassins to take out the tenants without even being questioned. So here you have this landowner. He sends 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And every time he sends one, these tenants destroy them, kill them, wound them, stone them. The tenants, the caretakers, believe that they are actually the owners of this place, that they're in charge. They have no respect for the higher authority that they've been accountable to. They've actually gone against the covenant that they've made with the owner. They've put themselves in the place of the owner himself. He's far away. It doesn't really matter. We'll do what we want. In a moral sense, they think that they're superior. They've taken a self-interest and they've claimed the vineyard as their own. And instead of working for and on behalf of the owner with the agreed upon covenant that they've made, they're now living for themselves. They're living for a different kingdom. They're oppressing. They're not showing mercy. They're not showing justice or compassion or patience or kindness or any of the things that God said they were to be about. Now here's a question. Take off your little Christian hat for a moment in the Sunday school answer. If you were living next to this and you keep hearing the news of this landowner who sent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, what would your perception in our world be today of that landowner? What would you think of him? He's weak? You ignore him? What kind of a loving man would put his employees at such a risk? How could he continue to do that? What kind of man is this? That's the point of the parable. The parable is causing these people to think of the landowner and how ridiculous, weird, weak he is. Now, is that a good business decision? Is he making good business decisions? Now, if he's doing this every year, which, who knows, that would be an assumption I'm making that's probably wrong. But is he willing just to throw his money away? That's the point of the parable, is it's to cause you and I to sit back and go, what is really going on here? What's with this guy? That's what parables for. They're meant to rattle you deep down in your heart, just like the Pharisees. Oh, they perceive that there's something more going on here. In Isaiah chapter 5, this is where they start to get some perception. In Isaiah 5, verses 1 and 2, it says this, "Let me sing of my beloved, my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and he cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it." Now, do you hear what we just read in Matthew? Where have we heard this before? So the Pharisees are like, something's familiar about this. And he hewed out a wine vat in it, and he looked at it for it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. Verse 7 of Isaiah 5. "For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel." "And the men of Judah are his pleasant planting. And he looked for justice, but behold bloodshed, for righteousness, but behold an outcry." Do you see why the Pharisees all of a sudden they're connecting some dots here? Wait a minute, he's talking about us here. And as these words are heard by the Pharisees, these words of Jesus, the coming of the Son, the Messiah, they begin to see that Jesus is talking about them, and it's not in a favorable way. Their wickedness, their lack of justice and compassion is revealing something's really off in the way that they're to live in response to their God. In fact, earlier on in Matthew chapter 3, at the baptism of Jesus, it says this, "And when Jesus was baptized, immediately he went up from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened to him. And he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and coming to rest on him. And behold, a voice from heaven said, 'This is my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased. The owner of the vineyard has sent his Son.'" The Pharisees are starting to put all these dots together that something's going on here. Right? Again, he sent other servants more than the first, and they did the same to them. Finally, he sent his Son to them, saying, "They'll respect my Son." He's the Son of the Father, the creator of the vineyard, who is Israel. They failed to care for the people of God. They haven't entrusted and lived in such a way that would love them. In fact, they are killing the servants for their own purposes. They're intoxicated with power and self-interest. The Jewish tradition held that Israel had martyred many prophets sent by God to them. And so we see the wickedness of these Pharisees who were to bear fruit in keeping with the owner of the vineyard. He's the Son. Here's the son of the landowner who's in their midst. And they sense, but what do they do to them? They kill the Son. Now, this is really prophetic because that's actually what would happen. But what is this parable about? It's the picture of the gospel. It's a picture about God's story and intervention in your life and my life. Listen to what it says in Romans 2, verse 4 and 5. "Or do you presume on the riches of his kindness and forbearance and patience, not knowing that God's kindness is meant to lead you to repentance? But because of your hard and impenitent heart, you're storing up wrath for yourselves on the day of wrath when God's righteous judgment will be revealed." This story is about the patience of God the Father to you and to me. His kindness to us, his compassion, his grace and his mercy. That the Father, this interaction with the Father was meant to be a turning point for these Pharisees to surrender their lives to the authority of Jesus. They can't. They can't kneel at his feet because their hearts are too hard. They didn't want to give up their power, their position, because they were their priority. Their hearts were so hard that they believed if they killed the son, they would receive the son's inheritance. Their hardness of heart has put an irrationality into them. They're focused on their own authority over their own lives, the entitlement that they have. And they don't care about the consequences of breaking the covenant with the landowner. They've misused his gracious patience and kindness and call on their lives to use his vineyard for their own purposes. They had in their minds turned evil to good and good to evil, right to wrong and wrong to right. Now, as I was meditating and thinking of this parable, how quickly I became a Pharisee. Oh, I'm so glad I'm not like them. Right? It's one thing to look at the Pharisees and wonder how they could be so wicked and distance myself from them. But really, I see myself in the Pharisees. And the more I see myself as one of the Pharisees, the more beautiful the patience, kindness, mercy, and grace of the Father is towards me. See, that's the juxtaposition of the Christian faith. The more that we see our sin, the more we see the beauty of Jesus, our Savior. And so the more I thought of this passage and are moving towards Easter morning, the more I see the gift of that beloved Son to me that was meant finally to turn my heart to Him. And to see that now the cross is empty. The tomb is empty. Christ is risen. That son that they killed is not dead. In fact, that son is risen for God's people to forgive their callousness of heart and for being merciless, for not showing compassion and kindness. They were so discontent with God's blessing in their life. This little story with big ideas causes me, and I hope you, to begin to ask questions yourself of, who is this Father that has saved me? How scandalous is that grace? It questions and moves me against the presumptions that I have for the way He should even treat me. That I don't need to have it all together because His kindness, if I really see it and God reveals it by His Spirit, it will lead me to repentance. But am I like the Pharisee where I don't see a need for it? What are some of the gracious gifts that God's given to you? What are some of the gracious gifts that God's given you? Tell me. Family? Awesome. A church? What else? A home? Faith? Well, don't stop. Keep going. Food. What was that, Alan? Writing. So if you don't know, Alan spends time writing out his prayers and thoughts to God to keep his heart engaged to his loving Father. So it's just such a gift to him. What else? Salvation. Music. Love. One of the things that struck me, and probably because I'm reading a book on gender theory right now, is the gift of our sexuality. That the reality of me as a male man has significance and purpose so that I can be who God has fully created me to be. And how a world is denying that authority in God's creative ability by wanting to be their own gods, and it's destroying them. I'm thankful by the grace of God that I see that I'm a man. That my wife is a woman. That we have 2 children because of that. What a gift. Don't take that for granted. What else? Joy. You know what else I'm thankful for? Physical limitations. I'm thankful for suffering and sickness because it reminds me that there's something greater yet to come. If you just stop and you start thinking and thinking and thinking, more and more things come to our mind. I began to ask myself, who are the people in my life that I'm impatient with that I don't want to show mercy to? Don't have to answer that. Right? On the other side of that, who are some of the people, as you think back, that God has sent His servants into your life who've been absolutely pinnacle in your walk with God? And they haven't always told you what's good or comfortable, but they've... And I sat and I started thinking of all the people in my life. Some of them at the time when they called me on things, I wasn't really too happy that they were my friend. And then you get away and you gain some perspective and you go, thank God that you would risk our friendship to invest in me. There's so many questions that this has opens up that you can sit and think about this week. And you can slow down and you can bow your head, or maybe you don't. Maybe you sit there and stand with your arms raised high and you call out to God and you meditate on His scriptures. I'm reminded of the patience of God's Father toward me, a sinner. Thinking of all the times that He has sent His servants and I haven't listened. Or who is God calling you to go to as a servant of God? To be compassionate and loving and kind. Knowing that, well, can you imagine if you're the second or third servant that went? I might have taken a detour. What patience, what kindness, what goodness, what faithfulness, mercy, grace, and love the Father has shown to us. And then it culminates in the sending of His Son. Another question is, are there things in my life that are off limits to God? Are there things that I'm unwilling to surrender to Jesus? That's really the purpose of Lent. Maybe it's relationships, health, struggles of the mind, expectations of others, whatever it might be, where we have to just go, okay, I'm letting this go. And I'm just going to surrender to you. So I thought the best way to end this today is to go back and read about the Son. Isaiah 53. I want to read Isaiah 53. I'm going to read it slowly and deliberately because this is the Son who this patient Father has sent and why He sent Him to be your substitute, to take your place so that you too, when He was raised, we've been raised together with Christ. So let me read it for you, Isaiah 53. Actually, I'm going to read 3 verses before that, Gord. They're not there, but that's fine. Behold, my servant shall act wisely. He shall be high and lifted up and shall be exalted. As many were astonished at you, his appearance was so marred. It was marred beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. So shall he sprinkle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him. For that which has not been told them they see, and that which they have not heard they understand. Who has believed what he has heard from us? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. I'm thinking, how countercultural. He was despised, and he was rejected by men. He was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one with whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he bore our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he, the Son, was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace. And with his wounds, we are healed. The last great act of that landowner was to send his son, the thing that was most valuable to him. We all like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like sheep that before its shears is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off from the land of the living, he was stricken for the transgression of my people. They made his grave with the wicked and with the rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him and to put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many, and he makes intercession for the transgressors. You see, the Pharisees were right on one account. It is through the death of the Son that we do get an inheritance. But not in our killing of him, but as his willingness to die for us and for us to identify with him. And we receive everything that's necessary for life and godliness in the person of Christ. And so as you move towards Easter, I'd encourage you to sit and read this passage this week. Think about it. Contemplate it. Meditate on it. And then seek to live like the Father, the owner who is so gracious and compassionate. And any other thoughts or comments this morning on that you have? Before we sing a couple songs.